Have you ever met someone who rarely talks about their feelings? Someone who listens carefully, smiles politely, seems completely fine. But somehow you feel like there's an entire world inside them that nobody gets to see. Maybe they never share their struggles, never ask for help, never tell people what they're really thinking. And no matter how close you get, there always seems to be a hidden part of them. Psychology suggests that people who keep everything to themselves often share certain personality traits. But here's the surprising part. Most people assume they're simply private. In reality, their silence is often telling a much deeper story. Today we're exploring 7 traits commonly found in people who keep everything to themselves. And trait number 7 may completely change the way you see quiet people forever. 1. They learned early that vulnerability can be risky. Many people think secretive individuals are naturally private, but often their behavior was learned. At some point in their life, they opened up. They trusted someone. They shared their fears, their dreams, their emotions, and instead of receiving understanding, they received judgment, criticism, rejection, or betrayal. The human brain remembers emotional pain remarkably well. When vulnerability leads to hurt, the brain begins creating a protective rule. Keep it to yourself. Over time, this becomes a habit. Not because they don't want connection, but because their mind associates openness with danger. So instead of sharing what they feel, they carry it alone. 2. They overthink everything before speaking. Have you ever rehearsed a conversation in your head multiple times? People who keep things to themselves often do this constantly. Before they speak, they analyze. Before they share, they evaluate. Before they express emotions, they imagine every possible outcome. What if people misunderstand? What if it sounds stupid? What if someone judges me? What if I'm being too emotional? This endless mental filtering creates a problem. By the time they've decided whether something is worth saying, the moment has already passed. So they stay silent. Not because they have nothing to say, but because they're thinking too much about saying it. 3. They tend to be extremely independent. One interesting psychological pattern is that highly private people often value self-reliance. They prefer solving problems alone, handling stress alone, making decisions alone, and carrying burdens alone. On the surface, this looks like strength, and sometimes it is. But excessive independence can become emotional isolation. Because humans aren't designed to carry every struggle by themselves, yet people who keep everything inside often convince themselves, I'll deal with it, I don't need help, I'll figure it out. Even when they're overwhelmed, even when support is available, because depending on others feels uncomfortable, sometimes even frightening, for they feel more than they show. Here's something many people misunderstand. Quiet people are not always less emotional. In fact, many are the exact opposite. They often experience emotions very deeply. Joy feels intense. Disappointment feels intense. Embarrassment feels intense. Heartbreak feels intense. But instead of expressing these emotions outwardly, they process them internally. Psychologists sometimes describe this as emotional containment. The feelings are still there, sometimes stronger than anyone realizes. They're simply hidden beneath a calm exterior, which means the person who appears fine may actually be fighting battles nobody can see. 5. They fear becoming a burden. This trait is surprisingly common. Many private people hesitate to share problems because they worry about inconveniencing others. They think, everyone has their own problems. I don't want to bother anyone. I don't want to sound dramatic. I don't want people worrying about me. So instead of reaching out, they stay quiet. Even when they're struggling, even when they desperately need support. Ironically, the people who care about them often wish they would open up more. But fear convinces them that silence is kindness, when in reality, it often creates loneliness. 6. They observe more than most people realize. Have you ever noticed how some people can walk into a room and instantly sense when something feels different? They notice tension before anyone says a word. They recognize when someone's smile isn't genuine. They pick up on subtle changes that most people completely overlook. This is often true for people who keep everything to themselves. Because when someone spends less time talking, they usually spend more time watching. They pay attention to body language, tone of voice, facial expressions, eye contact, and even small shifts in behavior. While others are focused on what they're going to say next, quiet individuals are often focused on understanding what's happening around them. Over time, this habit turns them into incredibly observant people. They start noticing patterns, they remember details, they recognize inconsistencies, and they often develop a surprisingly accurate sense of who they can trust. This heightened awareness can make them excellent judges of character. Sometimes they can tell when someone is being dishonest, when someone is hiding frustration, or when someone isn't being completely authentic. And because they notice these things so often, they become more selective about who they allow into their personal world. But this trait also has a downside. The more someone observes, the more they become aware of how people behave. They see how quickly people can judge others, how easily private information can become gossip, how often people pretend to care while secretly criticizing. As a result, they become cautious, not necessarily because they're afraid of people, but because experience has taught them to be careful. So instead of sharing their deepest thoughts with everyone, they keep them protected, reserved for the few people who have truly earned their trust. And from the outside, this may look like distance, but in reality, it's often the result of seeing more than most people realize. 7. They carry more than anyone knows. This final trait may be the most important of all. Many people who keep everything to themselves are carrying far more than anyone around them realizes. On the surface, they may appear calm, strong, independent, and completely in control. They go to work, handle responsibilities, smile during conversations, and continue moving through life as if everything is fine. But beneath that calm exterior, there is often a hidden emotional burden. Old disappointments they never got over, painful memories they rarely revisit, family struggles they don't talk about, personal insecurities they keep hidden, heartbreak that still lingers, stress that never fully goes away, regrets they wish they could change, and losses that quietly shaped who they became. These are not experiences they openly discuss. In many cases, they've spent years carrying them alone. Sometimes because they don't know how to explain what they're feeling. Sometimes because they believe nobody would understand. And sometimes because they've become so used to carrying the weight that it feels normal. Over time, silence becomes a habit. A habit of saying I'm okay when they're not. A habit of changing the subject when conversations become personal. A habit of keeping their struggles locked away where nobody can see them. And because they rarely speak about these experiences, others often assume they don't exist. People see the smile, the confidence, the composure, but they don't see the battles happening behind the scenes. That's the thing about emotional pain. It doesn't always announce itself. It doesn't always look dramatic. Sometimes it hides behind the strongest people in the room, and sometimes the people who seem the most put together are the ones working the hardest just to keep going. So if someone in your life seems unusually quiet, try not to assume they're distant or unaffected, because silence doesn't mean absence. Just because someone never talks about their pain doesn't mean they aren't carrying it every single day. In fact, some of the strongest looking people are often carrying the heaviest burdens, and nobody around them realizes it. Why people often misunderstand quiet individuals. One of the biggest misconceptions is assuming silence means confidence, or weakness, or happiness, or sadness. The truth is, silence can mean many different things. It can mean caution. It can mean reflection. It can mean protection. It can mean fear. It can mean wisdom. Or it can simply mean someone is carrying thoughts they don't know how to share. That's why judging people based only on what they reveal is often misleading. Because the loudest person in the room isn't always the one with the most going on, and the quietest person isn't always the one with the least. So let's recap. People who keep everything to themselves often share these 7 traits. They learned vulnerability can be risky. They overthink before speaking. They value extreme independence. They feel more than they show. They fear becoming a burden. They observe more than most people realize. And they often carry hidden emotional weight. But here's something important to remember. Keeping things private isn't necessarily bad. Everyone deserves personal boundaries. The problem begins when silence becomes a prison. When someone feels unable to ask for help, unable to share struggles, unable to let others truly know them. Because sometimes the strongest thing a person can do isn't carrying everything alone. It's allowing someone else to help carry it. Now I'm curious, do you think keeping everything to yourself is a strength, or can it become a weakness over time? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this psychology video, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more fascinating insights into human behavior. Because understanding people often starts with understanding the things they never say.